Okay, now we have a member of the Michigan State Senate and rising Democratic star, Mallory McMorrow. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled.
I've spent a lot of time interviewing candidates for the House and the Senate, but you're doing something just as important in Michigan. So, I feel like Democrats are always trying to stave off losing state legislative chambers. Yours in Michigan is a top target for a flip to the Democrats. Can you give an update here with just over a week to go until midterms on how that's going?
For sure. I mean, number one, I want to make the argument that state legislatures may be more important than the attention that we often pay to races at the top. No offense to my friends and federal colleagues, but Michigan is really exciting. We had independent redistricting that gives us a chance for the first time in my entire lifetime to flip the state Senate from Republican to Democratic control. We feel cautiously optimistic. I've been all over the state helping to raise money and get out on doors with our candidates, and we just got to get through Election Day and get it done.
What's effectively on the ballot if Michigan Democrats are able to flip the chamber?
We have 40 years of an agenda that we have to make up for. Number one, I think that it is imperative that we fix the basics, that we protect voting rights, that we codify reproductive rights and abortion access, even though we do have a ballot initiative in Michigan to do just that, so that we can get back to normal. And then I know my colleagues on the Democratic side, we want to lean into what makes Michigan the best place in the world, a place where people will come to for job opportunities, where we lean into protecting water and the environment and clean energy, and really lead the way into what the future of the auto industry looks like and mobility looks like. There's so many things.
So one major issue I feel like we have to focus on is, the fact that I believe 17 states thus far have outlawed abortion. I think that number is going to probably rise to 26 after this next election cycle. That's without some nationwide abortion protections. Can you talk about Proposal 3 in Michigan?
Prop 3 in Michigan would amend our state constitution to effectively codify Roe on the state level. So it would guarantee abortion access and also reproductive rights when it comes to things like contraception, things like sterilization, which women and men both choose once they've maybe had the number of kids that they want to have in their family, so that is a guaranteed constitutional right in our state that cannot be tampered with.
And how has that issue impacted not just Democrats, but independents and Republicans since you've been on the campaign trail?
It's been really fascinating. I think that the Dobbs decision actually coming down and taking Roe away has given so many more people the ability and the freedom to talk about this issue the way we should have been talking about it for decades. For decades, I feel like the issue of abortion has been caught in the rhetoric of either you're for abortion on demand or you're a baby killer, which is not at all what this issue is about. So we are hearing from so many women and families who have had complicated pregnancies, who have had ectopic pregnancies and survived, who have had miscarriages that didn't pass, and the hardship of having to go through to be able to have an abortion, and just how complicated this issue really is. I heard from a constituent in one of the most Republican parts of my district that he actually saw petitions to get this issue on the ballot circulating to collect signatures after Mass at his Catholic church. And that was a real moment for me where I recognized this is so much bigger than people who are showing up at rallies, right? These are hard conversations that people are having with their mothers, with their grandmothers, people who know what this was like before Roe, and recognizing that this is something that we have to protect.
But do you think that voters are recognizing? In Michigan, you have Prop 3 on the ballot, and so that kind of separates the issue from the candidates. But we shouldn't forget that Republican candidates, if they're elected to office, they'll still push forward legislation or laws that will undermine exactly this proposal. So do you think that even those independents, even those Republicans who are out there supporting measures that would allow for bodily autonomy, do you think they're able to recognize that the people on the Republican side who are still vying for their votes are the ones that would put forward legislation that would undermine exactly this proposal?
I think the answer is twofold, because number one, I do think Michigan voters recognize that. But number two, as a Democratic candidate down ballot, that's part of our job too, is to go out into the field, is to knock doors, is to talk to people about exactly this. So at the top of the ticket, we have Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who has been one of the most vocal advocates for this issue. She filed a lawsuit in the state well before the Dobbs decision came out, and her lawsuit is the only thing keeping abortion legal in Michigan right now. On the other side, we have Tudor Dixon, who's somebody who has said over and over again that she does not believe in any exceptions for rape or incest. She has argued that a child victim of rape being forced to carry their rapist baby to term is actually a healing experience for, again, that child. It's just horrific. And Tudor Dixon has tried to make the argument now that you can vote for Prop 3 and you can vote for her. And I think that's really disrespectful to voters. Voters are a lot smarter than that. We have had 50 years of Roe, where we've seen that, yes, even when Roe was the law of the land, we still had legislatures all around the country chipping away at access, making it harder and harder and harder. And in our legislature, so our 1931 abortion ban makes abortion a felony with a minimum of 4 years in prison for any medical provider or anybody who aids in that abortion. The Republicans in our legislature not only have not taken up bills to repeal that law, but they've introduced legislation to expand it to 10 years in prison. So we have them on record of trying to make it significantly harder. We just have to make the case to voters that you can't have it both ways, and you deserve legislators who will respect the will of your vote on the ballot.
Another major issue that I feel like we absolutely have to be cognizant of is the issue of Moore versus Harper, which is coming before the Supreme Court. That's the independent state legislature theory. Can you speak on that case that'll be argued in front of the court? And also, has it been a motivating factor for you as you've been trying to flip this chamber?
It has. And for those who are not familiar with this case, so Moore v. Harper is a case out of North Carolina related to gerrymandered maps that they put forward. And if the Supreme Court rules in its favor, they could do so under the independent state legislature theory, which you mentioned, which is a really extreme interpretation of the Constitution that would effectively say that state legislatures and state legislatures only are the ones who oversee and facilitate elections. It means that they would not be accountable to the courts. It means they would not be accountable to secretaries of state or even state constitutions. And you can imagine if that's the reality, we could end up in a place where a state legislature could decide, well, we no longer want to run the popular vote for the president in our state. We just want to appoint electors ourselves. That is our right as the state legislature. So it sets up a really scary future where we may not have free and fair elections for the presidency or for federal offices if this were to go through. That is a huge motivating factor for me here in Michigan. We saw after the 2020 election, my Republican colleagues go out to Washington to meet with the Trump administration to talk about how to overturn the 2020 election results. The Republican candidate for Attorney General worked with the Trump administration on how to potentially overturn the 2020 election results. So I feel like Michigan is the epicenter right now, and it is more important for me and for our entire state to basically tell everybody who's trying to push forward on this extremist view of how our country should work that it's not going to work. It doesn't work here. You're not going to win here. And we do that starting in our state legislature. And I hope that Michigan can become an example that the rest of the country can follow.
I think it's so important to talk about this now because it's kind of going to be the same situation as Roe was, where no one was paying attention to it. I mean, Roe is a worse example than this because this is especially obscure, but no one was paying attention until the moment that it became too late, and suddenly everybody knew what it was. Same as gerrymandering, where people didn't even know what that word meant until we were gerrymandered out of, God knows how many seats. So I'm glad that we're able to talk about this now. Republicans have really focused for 50 years on state legislatures. They've outspent Democrats 3-1. They've beaten Democrats out of 1,000 state legislature seats, 28 chambers, and on and on. If you could send a message to, the powers that be about where they focus resources, what would you say?
So it's an example that keeps me up at night all the time is in 2020, Democratic donors spent about $96 million to try to defeat Mitch McConnell with Amy McGrath's campaign. And this is not a knock on Amy McGrath. I haven't met her personally, but she seems like a perfect candidate and a wonderful person. But that was a race that Democrats just were not going to win. And simultaneously, the DLCC, which is the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, their budget for 2020, the entire cycle for all 50 states, for all state legislature seats combined, was $51 million. Less than right around half of what we were sending to one federal race. And, it's been such a strange year for me, having gone viral for a speech that I gave and now being fairly well known to Democrats around the country. People approach me all the time and ask me when I'm going to run for higher office. When am I going to run for US Senate? When am I going to run for, anything else? And it really misses the point. It feels like we always get caught in this trap of looking for the one solution at the top, whether it's a US Senate race, whether it's the presidency. I think a lot of people thought once we get Trump out of office, that's going to fix everything. But it's not. It's not unless we build back this real political power in the states, in every single state legislature. And that is going to take time. It's going to take resources. And your resources are much better spent in state legislatures. I'm the anomaly right now. I'm one of the only state legislators in the country who is regularly on national TV. You're never going to see your state legislator on national TV. We're not going to be in national news, but you're going to see us in the grocery store. We're the ones that you can actually talk to face. And these are races that are won with thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars. And we have to rebuild across the country. So that's my message is I know, we're a days out from the election. There's going to be that tension to go to whatever the US Senate race is that is of the moment right now. Don't do it. Look up your state legislator, look up who is in your chamber and chip in to them. It's going to make a huge difference.
What have you, and you may have answered this question, but what have you found is the most effective way to make people recognize and care about these smaller races as opposed to, the biggest Senate race going on in the country right now?
Well, that's part of my strategy with this new platform that I found for myself is I recognize that I'm very unique in that I do have the microphone. I do have this national attention on me. And if I can use myself as a spokesperson for the importance of state legislatures to introduce people to, the incredible people that we have in Michigan right now, who I hope will become my colleagues who are running for state Senate, and really recognize that that national media is that hook to bring it down. That is what I'm really committed to doing right now. And my hope is that if and when we flip the Michigan Senate, then it sends a signal to national Democrats all around the country that this is the way we have to do it. We can speak more honestly. We can talk about our values. We can be aggressive, and we can win if we focus down ballot.
And by the way, that's our bench too. So, we have an issue with age in this party. We have an issue with people focusing on these right races. So I think that when we're looking for who's the next person, and especially in the case of where everyone's like, oh, well, we don't know who would take over after Joe Biden, but building our bench is so important. And that's exactly where these people come from. So with that said, you're 36, I believe, correct?
Yes.
What would you like to see from the party in terms of looking more like the people that it's trying to field for support?
I would love to see our party do more to amplify people like me and some of my colleagues. I mean, there are people like me in legislatures all around the country who are young, who are diverse, who have very different backgrounds, who are passionate and exciting and going about this in a different way. And, you see the Republican Party right now getting caught up in cult of personality. It's all about Trump all the time. And Trump has quite literally said, only I can fix it. I think a strength of the Democratic Party is we are a big tent party. We are made up of so many different types of people. So let's put more of us out there. Let's showcase all of the diversity of our party by age. And here's a secret, when everybody asks me, how are we going to get young people out to vote? Run young people for office. I talked to high school students and college students who, yes, I'm in my mid 30s, but I'm the youngest person in the Senate. I'm the closest person to them in age. and they can meet with me at a coffee shop. We can talk about gun violence. We can talk about solutions in a way that gets them engaged. And as a party, I think we have to do a lot more to elevate way more voices than just the people at the top.
Now, you actually flipped a Republican held seat. What issues or messaging were most resonant with the people of your district? Like not just Democrats, but independents and Republicans.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. I Googled how to run for office, and I had never done this before. I left a very different career, and I filed to run a year and a half before Election Day. So it was very early. And I really I'm a nerd. I was trying to figure out what are the most important issues, what's going to connect with people. And we were talking about a lot of issues, but I was surprised when I started knocking on doors. And, you can imagine this was 5 years ago now. And when I'm out with a backpack on and a baseball hat, I look like I'm 12. And I knocked on doors and I was worried that that was going to be a challenge. But I talked to so many residents who said, you remind me so much of my daughter or my son who left and went to Denver or Chicago or New York or LA. And that became the hook, was what brought you back to Michigan and what can we do to keep my kids here? And that crosses party lines. That is just about, there was a recognition, I think, from some voters in my district who may be older, which is it's not as much about me anymore. It's about the next generation. And I think there's a huge strength to that opened the door for me to talk about economic issues, water quality, how, the suburbs where I serve connect to the city of Detroit and public transit, and all of these things that I think Democrats are really strong in through the lens of this is the thing that's going to bring your kids back.
With that said, you touched on your background. It is kind of weird, kind of unorthodox. Can you talk a little bit about what you did before you ran for state senate?
Yeah, I never had any idea that I would be here. I graduated from Notre Dame with a degree in industrial design and always wanted to be a car designer. And I picked the worst possible time to do that in 2007 and 2008. So I graduated in 2008. I had an internship at Mazda, and then the entire industry fell off a cliff. So I lived in the back of my car. I worked in retail. I applied to probably 500 different jobs, but eventually found my way to Mattel, where I was a senior designer over global branding and licensing for Hot Wheels. And then that parlayed into some work in media. I was the creative director for Gawker Media. I was the partner in a production company that did documentary films and live events. And then when we moved back to Michigan, I opened my own consultancy, doing a little bit of all of that. So I was consulting with the auto industry and smaller local businesses on branding and creative direction. And then the 2016 election happened. And I think I, like a lot of people, woke up the next day and just thought, oh, crap, I gotta do something about this. And I don't know what yet.
If you, I feel like I do this with my friends all the time, but now we have this explosion of EVs that are just, that everyone is just completely new, completely different. If you can get any EV that's on the market or not, what would it be?
Oh, any EV? Okay, well, this is something that I can't afford, but there is a startup company called Charge that makes replica original Mustangs, but they're EV and they look super cool. They're like $200,000. I could not possibly afford it. But if, Ford or anybody is out there, if you make a replica original Mustang EV, I'm all over it.
Let's finish off with this. What's next for you?
What's next is flipping the Senate. We got less than 2 weeks left, and I have been pulled in a lot of different directions. I've had a lot of people reach out and say, are you going to work with the DNC? Are you giving messaging training? But I am somebody, I gave up my career to do this because I think this matters. And my firm belief is that if we flip this chamber, this is an entirely new playbook, that is something much more tangible that then I can take back to the DNC. I can take back to the DLCC. I can work with legislators all over the country and say, this is how we go forward, guys. Let's get it done.
So often that we hear okay, we just need to flip the chamber as if it's just this ethereal thing. But day one, if Democrats control legislative chambers in Michigan, what would actually get done?
Well, the question is, and this is sort of a wonky answer to the question, it's a question of whether or not we flip both houses, because it is a very different dynamic. Let's say if the Senate flips, but the state house doesn't, because then we've got a Democratic governor, one Democratic chamber, and one Republican chamber. So we're still going to have to negotiate, but I think it gives us a much stronger leg to stand on in one chamber to really be pushing for a lot of our democratic priorities on education funding, on voting rights and protections, on women's rights, on supporting working families and trying to work with one chamber of Republicans to get something to the governor. Now, if they both flip, I think you look at a state like Virginia, which, that flipped in 2017. And I remember watching that when I was running in 2018 and looking at Virginia like, we can do that here if they did it there. And they were really aggressive on gun violence prevention, on reforming tax structure to make it more fair, and really signaling this is what happens when you put Democrats in charge.
And finally, how can we help?
How can you help? Check me out on Twitter, which is a weird thing to say now that it's day one of Elon Musk owning Twitter. But link is in the top of my bio. My website is mcmorrowformichigan.com. And my PAC, which I open to support state legislators, is amoreperfectmichigan.com.
Mallory McMorrow, thank you so much for taking the time, and keep kicking ass these last little over a week now.
Yeah, thank you. You too.